Okay, so today we're going to be talking about wire strippers, and as you probably already know, there's a bunch of different types. These are kind of the traditional wire strippers you have, which also does the lug nuts and then the different gauge wires. These come with a lot of things, and so you probably have a pair of these laying around in your toolbox. And then there's these adjustable ones. These are also really cheap. I think you can buy these for $5. Where you just basically adjust the screw and move this up and down, and that decides on the depth of the cut. This is a fancier version of essentially the same thing, except this uses a wheel right here that you turn, and that changes the amount of spacing that you actually have in the stripper head. So if I rotate this out, then these won't close as much. They'll take a larger gauge wire. So these are kind of nice because you can adjust them a lot easier and then leave them in the same spot if you're doing the same wire size than say using this type where you have to actually use a screwdriver to move it up and down. And then when you want to get fancy, you have these automatic wire strippers. There's a bunch of different manufacturers of these, and they all kind of work the same way. But effectively, the wire goes in on these, goes in on the bottom, and then effectively it grabs it on one side, and then this side here will bite down and effectively pull the wire out and strip it. As you can see, it just did right here. So these are kind of cool, and this is what we're really talking about today, is that these are great. If you have larger gauge wire, then you can use any one of those things I was just showing you. But when you get into smaller gauge wires, like 22 gauge or 20 gauge and above really, these things start to have a problem, and plus you start using you're trying to work on stuff that maybe inside a device and you don't have as long of a pigtail, because look how much you actually have to have a wire to go into this to use something like this. You're not going to be able to get that down inside of an enclosure necessarily, and then have this much to bite onto. And they just don't work as good on smaller gauge wires. You squeeze the handle and it bites the end off instead of actually stripping it. Same thing, these things also, when you have smaller gauge wire, on these type of strippers, again, it's hard to get them adjusted perfectly so that they're not too far and they hit the metal or not. So that's where this really comes in. This is from Jonard tools. This is the ST500. So this does from 20 gauge to 30 gauge wire, which is much smaller than, say, this, which was a 16 gauge wire that we just did with the other stripper. And the way this works, this has two kind of convenient features. Basically, on the top here, you have a wheel, and you turn the wheel to whatever gauge wire you have. So already we're way better than we were on the other ones because we have a very specific thing we can put in. So we can dial in, we're going to do this on a 22 gauge wire. And then this has a wire stop, which is also nice. You can basically slide this back and forth, and that determines how much of the wire you're going to strip off. So if you're doing a bunch of the same wires, you can set it to the exact same amount that you're going to put in there. And then basically all you do is put your wire in the hole like this. This is actually a 22 gauge silicone wire. And you just stick this in the end, and it goes to the stopper. And let's just strip off a little bit less. So you put this in the end, and then you effectively just squeeze the yellow handles on both sides. That closes some teeth around it, and then you just pull your wire out. And there we go. We just stripped a 22 gauge wire. And what's nice about this is it'll work every single time. So if I want to strip the other end of this, I just put it in. And this is obviously something that you can easily get this down into an area where you're working, where you don't have a lot of lead. You just put it in there and pull it off, and there you go, it's stripped. So that was 22 gauge. This is a 24 gauge right here we'll demo. So again, I'm going to turn this up like this, set this to 24. This is a 24 gauge solid wire. The other one was a 22 gauge stranded. But so now we'll put this in here. We'll just leave it at the same amount. See it right there, and then you squeeze it and pull it out. There you go, stripped 24 gauge. And then this, we'll test the maximum. This is a 30 gauge solid wire. This is used for like wire wrapping and things like that, where you need a really, really tiny gauge. So again, I'll set this up to 30 gauge. Put the wire in. Again, we'll do the same amount to the stop block, and then you pull it off, and there you go. We have, might be hard to see there in the video, but it did strip that off there, and there's no nicks or anything. So it works really good. I highly recommend this type if you're working with any of the small gauge wire component wires. These work great. They make an ST500 ESD as well, which basically just means the materials it's made out of are electrostatic proof. They cost $10 more. This is $33. The ESD version is $43, at least as it sits right now on Amazon. And then they also make a 26 to 36 gauge, I believe is what it is. So a even smaller wire if you want to do that, you can buy also for $43. So these work great. I highly recommend them. And you can find the link to them on Amazon within the description. And thanks.